Is America going in the right direction? What is the outlook for America's future? Why do almost 70% of Americans polled believe that our nation is seriously off on the wrong track? Only 29% of Americans approve of the job that President Bush is doing. Only 18% are comfortable with the performance of Congress. The ratings are at an all-time low. One major newspaper, after analyzing the opinion polls, states that today Americans have a bleaker view of the country's direction than at any time in more than 2 decades. While there are many different reasons that could be cited for Americans' disappointment in our country's direction, this presentation will focus on just a few of the major reasons America is in trouble today, and it will offer viable solutions to help turn things around. Here follows areas of concern we must address, or America stands to lose her former respect and greatness forever, and all Americans will lose their most cherished liberties. We invite you to consider the following things and do something now to defend and uphold the Constitution of the United States. One thing is sure, if we continue to do the same things we have been doing, nothing will change for the better. Thomas Jefferson said in 1816, "I place economy among the first and most important Republican virtues, and public debt is the greatest of dangers to be feared." The founders established a republic which recognized that our rights come from God and not the government. A republic is a society based upon set laws that all must be willing to live by in order to remain free. In the Declaration of Independence, it states that we have God-given unalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. When the government assumes any other functions than protecting us and those rights, it is usurpation and oppression. Today, most of our elected officials have determined that our basic God-given rights include jobs, housing, transportation, education, healthcare, and others. In order for government to provide these things, they must forcibly take money or property from one in order to give to another. When you seek to make government the answer to every societal problem or inequality and then use the redistribution of wealth to achieve it, this is socialism, pure and simple. Again, Thomas Jefferson got it right when he said, "Government big enough to supply everything you need is big enough to take everything you have." The course of history shows that as a government grows, liberty decreases. How did we decline into a socialistic form of government? It started with the Federal Reserve Act, passed in 1913, and coining our own money, backed by gold. As the Constitution demands, Congress wrongly delegated that function to international private bankers, also known as the Federal Reserve. One of the chief backers of the original Federal Reserve Bank, Lord Rothschild, said, "Give me control of a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws." This meant that the government basically got a brand new credit card with no limit. The politicians could now spend more money than they actually had in order to buy more political influence. Then they decided to tax our income to pay for the interest charges on their borrowing. Alan Greenspan said this in 1967 before he was appointed the Fed chairman. "Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights." Look at our nation's debt history and see how the Federal Reserve Act affected our national debt. The per capita debt represents what every man, woman, and child in America would have to pay in order to get us out of debt. Now consider these sobering facts. Federal spending has grown twice as fast under Bush than Clinton, averaging 6 and 7% increases compared to the 3 and 4% increases of the 90s. The biggest increases in federal spending under Bush and the Republicans are not related to the war on terror or homeland security. The new 2007 federal budget sits at $2.7 trillion, the largest budget in U.S. history. Over the last 6 years, the federal government and its entitlement programs have grown more under a supposedly conservative president and a conservative Congress than at any other time in our nation's history. Does this follow a platform of limited government and erasing the national debt? Deficit spending means future tax increases. Many economic experts now believe that the only way to get out of this debt nightmare will be to either drastically cut all government benefits or increase our tax burden to upwards of 70% of our income in the future. The truth is that Congress does not need $2.7 trillion to fund the proper constitutional functions of the federal government. We must stop this fiscal irresponsibility now. The next major issue confronting our survival as a free nation is globalism. Under both major political parties, America is losing its sovereignty and independence, and the result will be a loss of our constitutional protections. The globalist agenda has been highly promoted by just about every presidential administration since Woodrow Wilson, with help, of course, from congressional Republicans and Democrats and the courts. But there has been more advancement of internationalism over the last 6 years than ever before. The 2004 Republican National Platform is a contradiction of sorts, not only to the words of our founding fathers, but to itself at times. In the platform it says, Republicans will not subordinate United States sovereignty to any international authority. Yet at the same time it also says, Republicans are guided by the conviction that no nation can build a safer, better world alone. In addition to NATO, the United States is committed to lasting institutions like the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. Thomas Jefferson said, I deem one of the essential principles of our government to be peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. In 1992, in a speech before the United Nations, President George H.W. Bush said, My vision of a new world order foresees a UN with a revitalized peacekeeping function. It is the sacred principles enshrined in the UN Charter to which we henceforth pledge our allegiance. Shouldn't our allegiance run only to the Constitution of the United States? The Founding Fathers thought so, as well as many other modern-day officials. Former Undersecretary of State to President Coolidge and former ambassador to Mexico who lived during the formation of the United Nations, J. Reuben Clark, had this to say about the sacred UN Charter to which President Bush pledged his allegiance. The Charter is built for war, not to promote peace. It makes it practically certain that we shall have future wars. And as to such wars, it takes from us the power to declare them, and to control our sons who do the fighting. In 2003, Secretary of State Colin Powell went to the United Nations to get permission to go to war in Iraq, and the United States ultimately invaded Iraq to enforce a United Nations Security Council resolution. The 2004 Republican platform also says, Republicans will not subordinate United States sovereignty to any international authority. Republicans will not allow the World Trade Organization to undermine the United States sovereignty. Let's look at what both Republicans and Democrats have actually done over the last 15 years. They virtually gave all control of our trade policies to the World Trade Organization. As a result of so-called free trade agreements like NAFTA, the United States has lost over 3 million manufacturing jobs, U.S. farm failures have increased, and the U.S. trade deficit has exploded. Thus, the American middle class is being eroded because of massive job outsourcing to other nations. Our economy is becoming dependent upon foreign nations, therefore threatening our sovereignty. Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution states that the United States shall protect each state against invasion. Why are many Americans calling this an invasion? Because the equivalent of 4 military divisions are coming over our border weekly and planting the flag of their country on our soil. Many of the illegal immigrants who have come to our nation over the last 10 years have no desire to assimilate into our culture. Today, America takes in more legal immigrants, well over 1 million per year, than the entire world does combined. We are the most welcoming nation in the world. However, it is illegal immigration and our move to a welfare state which will prove to be our demise. Now, we are also learning that the Bush administration's attempts to outsource America's vital assets to foreign interests are expanding rapidly. It seems clear that Bush intends to sacrifice everything from America's roads and bridges to the ownership of U.S. airlines upon the altar of globalism. USA Today reported on July 15, 2006, roads and bridges built by U.S. taxpayers are starting to be sold off, and so far foreign-owned companies are doing the buying. Furthermore, Jerome Corsi reported in WorldNet Daily on July 18, 2006, that the Department of Transportation, acting under President Bush's orders, is preparing to issue an administrative ruling that would open U.S. airlines up to foreign ownership despite specific prohibitions and warnings from Congress, as well as predictions by pilots that another Dubai port's controversy is in the offing. The Bush administration is now moving quickly towards destroying the last vestiges of independence and sovereignty that we have with their new Security and Prosperity Partnership for North America agreement with Mexico and Canada. Signed last year with a goal of completion by 2010, it will completely eliminate our borders, and Congress isn't doing a thing about it either. Now you can begin to see why the President has not secured our borders. He wants to resolve the illegal immigration problem by erasing the borders, forming a North American Union, and having open migration between our three nations. CNN's Lou Dobbs reported on this fast-approaching reality in June of 2006.
The Bush administration's open borders policy and its decision to ignore the enforcement of this country's immigration laws is part of a broader agenda. President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it, and he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States. Bill Tucker reports.
The Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America sounds benign, hardly like a policy that critics call NAFTA on steroids. It's a deal that few have even heard of.
It's being done again by very few people at the very top on behalf of the investment class, but the working class of people, political officials across our country, from communities, from cities and so forth, they don't know anything about this.
Yet it was agreed to by Mexico's President Fox, Canada's Prime Minister Martin, and President Bush in 2005. Administration officials counter their critics by saying everything about SPP is on the White House website. And they say the partnership is not a treaty, but more of an outline of priorities between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Still, some wonder why there haven't been public discussions about the goals being pursued.
This SPP includes, for instance, a committee that is sitting down to harmonize our meat inspection and food safety. So how far away from a trade agreement can your dining room table and what you feed your kids be?
Other parts of the agreement mention border security as an issue, which include all of North America. In fact, the name of the agreement is not Security and Prosperity of the United States, but of North America.
When we are elected officials, we expect them to act on our behalf. When we get involved in cooperative frameworks with other countries for joint regulation of fisheries or rail transportation or the skies, we're basically sharing our sovereignty with that government and outsourcing some of what we give our elected officials.
As disturbing as some find SPP, there is legislation in the House introduced by Florida's Katherine Harris that closely resembles the goals of the partnership. Included in that bill is a section which calls for the securing of Mexico's southern border by the United States and Canada. Lou, that's not the border with the United States, that's the border they share with Belize and Guatemala.
The idea that the White House would respond that this is on their website, this involves intricate workings amongst the Commerce Department of this country and Canada and Mexico's, of course. A regional prosperity and security program. This is absolute ignorance. And the fact that we reported this, we should point out, when it was signed. But as we watch this thing progress, these working groups are continuing, they're intensifying. What in the world are these people thinking about?
Well, they say, look, these are a declaration and an outline of our priorities. And when I called them today, Lou, they said I was the first phone call they had received literally since the deal was first signed. So people are not paying attention, and they're letting them, in fact, get away with this.
You know, I was asked the other day about whether or not I really thought the American people had the stomach to stand up and stop this nonsense, this direction from a group of elites in absolute contravention of our law, of our Constitution, every national value. And I hope, I pray that I'm right when I said yes. But this is beyond belief. Bill.
The dissolving of America into global government has been the goal of the same powerful elites that Lou Dobbs referred to in that video clip. Many of these corporate, political, and media elites are members of a group called the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR. The CFR has long played an inordinately large role in presidential administrations. The body, headquartered in New York City, was organized largely by Edward Mandell House, Woodrow Wilson's top advisor. Since its inception, the CFR has worked hard to maintain control of the presidency, regardless of which party is in office, and direct policy as much as it is able toward the submergence of U.S. sovereignty under the overarching authority of a world government. Just as the CFR played a significant role in both the Clinton and first Bush administrations, it does so today in the George W. Bush administration. In January, President George W. Bush had a meeting with current and former Secretaries of State and Defense at the White House to discuss the war in Iraq. In fact, President Bush and the other participant posed in the Oval Office for a group photo. The media overlooked a very important aspect of the photo, and that is that 14 of the 17 policymakers in the picture currently belong to the Council on Foreign Relations. This picture provides just a snapshot of the dominance that the CFR has held over the executive branch of the U.S. government for decades. Multi-billionaire David Rockefeller, founder of the Rockefeller Foundation and also a member of the CFR, admits to this fact. In his book Memoirs, published in 2002, David Rockefeller Sr. made the following remarks, startling in their very frankness. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. Nearly 30 years ago, in April 1974, a now famous essay entitled The Hard Road to World Order appeared in the CFR journal Foreign Affairs. It was penned by Columbia University professor and veteran State Department official Richard N. Gardner, who most recently served in the Clinton administration. It is also the game plan followed by the CFR elites. Gardner told his fellow one-worlders that instant world government is an illusion because Americans would not accept an open assault on their constitutional system. The globalists, he said, must continue to labor for the piecemeal creation of an all-powerful superstate. It must be built gradually, piece by piece, brick by brick. He then said, an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Gardner suggested luring all nations into a variety of technological, economic, and political entanglements, which would gradually be strengthened until they formed a genuine world government. Mr. Bush is an ardent supporter of the UN. Welcoming UN Secretary-General Kofi Annan to the Oval Office on February 3rd, the President enthused, "The world is changing for the better, and the United Nations is playing a vital role in that change." In fact, under Bush, the U.S. has paid its supposed back dues to the world body and attempted to justify the war in Iraq by pointing to UN resolutions supposedly authorizing military action. Dick Cheney also has a history of working towards world government and has hidden this fact from Americans. In 1978, Cheney won election to the U.S. House of Representatives as Wyoming's sole congressman, and at first he was fairly conservative, but during that time, Cheney also became an active internationalist, joining the CFR in 1982 and eventually serving as a director of the organization. As Cheney acknowledged in a speech before the CFR on February 15, 2002, he was careful to avoid mentioning that affiliation in dealing with his conservative constituents.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
If you have ever wondered why the two major parties appear so different at election time, but not so different afterward, consider carefully establishment insider and political mentor of Bill Clinton's, Professor Carroll Quigley, and his approving overview of American politics from his book, Tragedy and Hope. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to the doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extreme shifts in policy. The formula advocated by Quigley in 1966 has been put into practice by the power elite which dominates both major political parties. Above all other dangerous issues that we now face in America, and of which we must stop now, it is the loss of our constitutionally protected liberties. Again, this is the result of both negligence and ignorance from both major political parties, but it has also come by design. Benjamin Franklin stated, "Those who would sacrifice essential liberties for a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." The Constitution of the United States was divinely inspired and given to mankind to be a beacon or example of freedom. It is what God would like all of His children to choose to be governed by. The supreme law of the land by which we must follow if we wish to remain free and independent is the Constitution of the United States, and this form of government was meant to rule over a moral and religious people. However, the Constitution is under direct attack and has been seriously endangered by not only the move towards globalism, but also by perceived external threats. We must uphold and defend the Constitution, or else we will lose the only protector of our God-given rights that we have. Again, former Undersecretary of State J. Reuben Clark had this to say about these liberties. "The principle of allegiance to the Constitution is basic to our freedom. When you see government invading any of these realms of freedom which we have under our Constitution, you will know that they are putting shackles on your liberty, and that tyranny is creeping upon you, no matter what the reason and excuse therefor may be." The current administration is certainly trying to give us a reason and excuse to justify taking away our liberties. They have ingrained in the minds of Americans that we are constantly under threat of terrorist attack. They have undertaken dangerous precedents that cannot be reversed in legislation like the USA Patriot Act, signed just after 9/11 and renewed last year after a series of attacks in London. It is interesting to note the Webster's Dictionary definition of terrorism: systematic covert warfare to produce terror for political coercion. Now consider this collection of quotes taken from the 2004 Republican National Convention speeches given by prominent Republican leaders and even one Democrat. Determine for yourself if you think there's a subliminal message being sent to the American people to get them to sacrifice essential liberties for safety. Keep in mind while viewing this that not one quote was repeated in making this montage.
Great city, we saw tragedy arrive on a quiet morning. September the 11th. September the 11th. September the 11th.
September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th.
September 11th, September 11th.
September 11th. September 11th.
September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th.
September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th. September 11th, 2001. Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein.
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam.
Saddam.
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam.
Saddam, Saddam, Saddam.
Saddam. Saddam.
Saddam Hussein.
And danger.
Continuing danger.
Hour of danger.
Very, very dangerous world.
A grave new threat.
Horrific acts of atrocities.
Murderous regimes.
Dedicating to killing us.
Tyranny and terror.
Slaughtered thousands.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Weapons programs.
The deadliest of weapons.
Terrible weapons. Nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons.
Poison gas.
Torture chambers. Mass graves.
Deadly technologies.
Radical ideology of hate.
Terror threats.
Terror.
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 War on terrorism.
War against terrorism.
Global war on terror.
Global terrorism. 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 Global terrorism.
Terrorism. Terrorism.
Terrorism. Terrorism.
Terrorism. Terrorism. Terrorism. Terrorism. Terrorism.
The evil terrorists. 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 Terrorists.
Terrorist, 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 terrorist.
Terrorist.
Terrorists.
Terrorist. Terrorist.
Terrorists. 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 Terrorists.
It seems that the Republican leadership wants us to be afraid for our lives. After all, many people are willing to be inconvenienced as long as they think they will be safer. Consider these quotes from history. Plato, a Greek philosopher often quoted by our founders, said, "This and no other is the root from which a tyrant springs. When he first appears, he is a protector." Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, "The easiest way to gain control of a population is to carry out acts of terror. The public will clamor for such laws if their personal security is threatened. If the current administration and congressional Republicans and Democrats truly wanted to protect us, why didn't they secure our borders immediately after the 9/11 attacks? Why do they continue to keep our borders wide open so that any supposed terrorist could just walk across into our country? The U.S. Patriot Act was prepared long before September 11th and is hundreds of pages long, and almost none of the members of Congress who voted it into law even read the legislation before voting for it. The Patriot Act severely threatens our Bill of Rights and has completely obliterated the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. Just think about all that has happened over the last 5 years as a result of what happened on 9/11. Do these things truly provide the excuse to destroy our constitutionally protected liberties? If we lose our Constitution, we no longer have any protection against a tyrannical government and a total loss of liberties. All of these things were foreseen years ago by many people who tried to warn us. One of those was former Agricultural Secretary Ezra Taft Benson, who said way back in 1976, "At this bicentennial celebration, we must, with sadness, say that we have not been wise in keeping the trust of our founding fathers. For the past 2 centuries, those who do not prize freedom have chipped away at every major clause of our Constitution, until today we face a crisis of great dimensions. We must act now, or else we will lose our freedoms forever." A constitutional scholar and historian, Stephen Pratt, gave a great presentation about why we should never vote for the lesser of 2 evils. In this video, he compares 2 well-known politicians.
My friends will say to me, kind of apologetic, there's nothing we can do. All we have is the choice of voting for the lesser of 2 evils. Now, you've all heard that, probably said it. Now we're going to give you a picture, and we're going to say you're going to go to the polls in November, and this is your choice. And you believe that the only choice you have is voting for the lesser of the 2 evils. Well, which one are you for? I would vote for Hitler. The body count. If you're going to go by body count, you better vote for Hitler, because Stalin did a lot more damage to bodies than Hitler did. A lot more. Stalin, no. Hitler, yes. Oh, I'm for Hitler. See how stupid that is? Some people say, well, that's an absurd example. Okay, let's come up to today. Let's suppose you're going to go to the polls in November. Now, we have a track record on these 2 men. We go to the polls in November, and these are the 2 candidates, and we have to choose. And we're going to vote for the lesser of 2 politicians. Don't want to call a president evil. It's okay. We're going to keep with politicians here. Which one is the lesser of the 2 politicians? Well, I got to this point in my thinking, my critical thinking, and I says, well, I need a test. I need some measuring standard. It can't go by emotion. We all know that Clinton's a despicable adulterer. We don't want to vote for him. Let's take a more subjective test. I wrote some questions for myself as I started to try and critically evaluate our history. Just think in terms of the lesser politician. Which is the lesser? Which man encouraged the lesser number of illegal aliens to enter the United States? Which man spent the lesser amount of taxpayer dollars unconstitutionally? Which man increased the national debt the lesser amount? Which man advanced the lesser amount of bloated bureaucracy during his administration? Which man sent the lesser amount of American soldiers to serve as world policemen without a congressional declaration of war? Which man told the lesser number of lies to the American people? Which man gave the lesser support to the United Nations and the New World Order? Which man did the lesser damage to the right to bear arms? Which man gave the lesser amount of American military technology to foreign enemies? Which man did the lesser meddling in our socialized government school system? Which man appointed the lesser number of establishment insiders to high positions in government? Which man encouraged the lesser number of murders of millions of unborn children? Now, these are critical questions. A president ought to be able to answer those. And if you apply these to these 2 candidates, if they were candidates, This is how I scored them. 2 of them I couldn't decide. Since then, I determined that one of these 2 votes I'm going to put in favor of Bill Clinton. But just look at the scores I got 6 months ago. 2 undecided. I couldn't decide which one had lied the most. I counted up the lies I could gather from the news media, and it was a question of which one had done the most lying. Since then, I've decided that George W. Bush probably wins that one, so I would have to vote for Clinton. The next one, George W. Bush got 3. I voted for him 3 times out of those 12 test questions. And William Jefferson Clinton, I would have to give credit for 7. He is the lesser of the 2 politicians. As revolting as that was to me, had I been faced with the choice of voting for these 2 men, I would have to vote for William Jefferson Clinton as the lesser of the 2 politicians.
From this presentation, as well as the proof that we have seen of a plan to use the 2 major parties to push forth the same agenda, it should now be obvious that to continue to vote for the lesser of 2 evils in America today will lead to national suicide. There are candidates from other parties who may be worthy of our support, but he can't win, is the common response. Our reply is, so what? Elections are not football pools in which the object is to win a bet. The purpose of an election is not to pick winners, but to support candidates who reflect our personal principles. If the general population is not educated about the Constitution and the limits it puts on the federal government, how can they hold their elected officials accountable? If every citizen doesn't do their duty, then these disturbing trends will continue. Thomas Jefferson said, "Anyone who desires to be ignorant and free desires what never was and never will be." There is a true constitutional conservative party in America today seeking to defend moral issues. They are seeking to return our nation to its founding principles and hence to our original greatness by following the original intent and the inspired direction given by our founding fathers. Now is the time to study, understand, and restore the greatest principles of self-government that the world has ever known, as declared in the Declaration of Independence and intelligently designed in the Constitution of the United States. Again, Plato had prophetic words of wisdom for us when he said, "The penalty good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men." We have a responsibility to seek truth and then practice freedom by electing good, wise, and honest people who are grounded in correct constitutional principles to represent us locally and nationally. We must also educate ourselves in the proper role of government now. We invite everyone to consider the Constitution Party of Utah and visit their website www.cputah.org. There is a wealth of information there about our freedoms and about the candidates that are running for office this year. The United States of America is a great nation, and it's worth saving. Please stop voting for the lesser of 2 evils and help America return to her former greatness and respect.